On the morning of January 15, 1947, the winter air in Los Angeles felt unusually still. Betty Bersinger was walking with her young daughter when she noticed something pale in a vacant lot on South Norton Avenue. At first, she assumed it was a discarded mannequin, broken, abandoned, unwanted. But as she stepped closer, the truth revealed itself in horrifying detail. It wasn't plastic. It was human. The body had been cut cleanly in half at the waist. The skin appeared drained of blood. The face had been carved into a grotesque smile. The positioning was deliberate, almost theatrical. Whoever had left her there wanted her to be seen. Police arrived within minutes. Officers secured the area, but word spread fast. Neighbors gathered, reporters rushed to the scene, cameras flashed relentlessly. Even before the victim was formally identified, the spectacle had begun. By the end of the day, detectives confirmed her name: Elizabeth Short. She was 22 years old, and the city would never forget her. A dreamer in a city of illusions. Elizabeth had not been born into tragedy. She grew up in Massachusetts, the daughter of Cleo and Phoebe Short. Her childhood, however, was marked by instability. Her father abandoned the family during the Great Depression, leaving her mother to raise 5 daughters alone. As a teenager, Elizabeth struggled with health issues and spent time in Florida recovering from respiratory problems. It was there that she developed a taste for warm weather and perhaps for reinvention. Like thousands of young women before her, she eventually drifted west, drawn by the magnetic promise of Hollywood. Los Angeles in the 1940s was a city built on fantasy. Film studios churned out glamorous starlets, nightclubs pulsed with music, soldiers returning from World War II filled the streets. It was a place where anyone could become someone, at least that was the illusion. Elizabeth wanted to be an actress. Friends later said she loved movies and admired glamorous starlets. She styled her dark hair carefully, dressed in black outfits, and carried herself with quiet confidence. Some described her as gentle and polite. Others thought she enjoyed mystery and attention. But behind the surface, she was drifting. She had no steady job, no stable apartment. She moved from place to place, relying on acquaintances and brief relationships. She told different versions of her story depending on the audience, sometimes exaggerating her connections to Hollywood insiders. It wasn't deception in the criminal sense. It was survival in a city that rewarded performance. The final days. In early January 1947, Elizabeth was staying in downtown Los Angeles. Witnesses placed her at the Biltmore Hotel on January 9th. She had reportedly met friends there and used the lobby phone. After that, the trail blurred. One witness claimed she left with a tall, dark-haired man. Another couldn't remember clearly. In the chaos of post-war Los Angeles, faces blended together. Transience was normal. For 6 days, Elizabeth Short vanished without alarm. No missing persons report made headlines. No urgent search began. And then her body was found. The crime scene that shocked a nation. Detectives immediately realized something chilling. She had not been killed where she was discovered. There was almost no blood at the scene. Her body had been washed clean. The bisection, the surgical separation at the lumbar spine, suggested anatomical knowledge. The cuts were precise, controlled, methodical. This was not a frenzied attack in an alley. This was preparation. Medical examiners determined she had been severely beaten before death. Rope marks suggested restraint. The cause of death was ruled to be cerebral hemorrhage from blunt force trauma. The mutilation came after. That detail disturbed investigators deeply. It implied calculation rather than rage, a desire to stage rather than simply kill. And the staging was undeniable. Her body was posed almost symmetrically, arms raised above her head, legs slightly apart. It was grotesque but intentional. Whoever did this wanted shock, and they got it. The birth of the Black Dahlia. Within days, newspapers seized upon a nickname, the Black Dahlia. The inspiration likely came from The Blue Dahlia, a popular noir released the previous year. The press combined the film's title with Elizabeth's dark clothing and striking appearance. It was dramatic, memorable, marketable. The name stuck. But the transformation came at a cost. Elizabeth Short, the daughter, the sister, the young woman chasing opportunity, began to disappear behind the myth. Papers exaggerated her lifestyle, hinting at scandal and seduction. Some stories implied she lived recklessly or dangerously. Much of it wasn't true, but in 1947, sensationalism sold, and the Black Dahlia became a spectacle. A killer who wanted attention. Just days after the body was discovered, a package arrived at the offices of the Los Angeles Examiner. Inside were Elizabeth's personal belongings, her birth certificate, social security card, photographs, and address book. They had been cleaned with gasoline to remove fingerprints. The sender had cut letters from newspapers to spell out a message. It was signed, Black Dahlia Avenger. The killer wasn't hiding in fear. He was communicating. More letters followed, taunting, cryptic, promising to surrender. One note claimed the writer would turn himself in at a specific location. Police waited. No one came. The media frenzy intensified. Citizens panicked. Women feared walking alone. The idea that a calculating killer roamed the city unsettled even hardened detectives, because this wasn't just murder, it was performance. The investigation begins. The Los Angeles Police Department launched one of the largest investigations in its history. Hundreds of officers were assigned. Thousands of tips flooded in. Men were questioned. Doctors were discreetly examined due to the surgical precision of the cuts. Transient workers, bartenders, former boyfriends, all found themselves under suspicion. But there was a fundamental problem. There was no confirmed murder scene, no weapon, no forensic technology beyond fingerprints and blood typing, and the killer had been careful. As days turned into weeks, the initial momentum began to slow. Leads contradicted one another. Witnesses changed stories. False confessions cluttered the files. Yet the case refused to fade because the crime itself was unforgettable. A young woman cut in half, a body posed like an exhibit, a killer who sent souvenirs to the press. It felt less like a random act and more like a message. But what message? Was it hatred, a desire for fame, a psychological game, or something far more personal? As the city tried to return to normal, one truth remained. Somewhere in Los Angeles, a person walked free who knew exactly what happened during those missing 6 days. And unless a mistake was made, that secret might die with them. By February 1947, the murder of Elizabeth Short had transformed from a horrifying crime into a full-blown obsession. In Los Angeles, fear and fascination moved side by side. The case dominated headlines. Strangers debated theories over coffee. Taxi drivers speculated about suspects. Hollywood producers whispered about it between meetings. But inside police headquarters, the mood was far less dramatic. It was exhausting. The Los Angeles Police Department had assigned more than 750 investigators and officers to chase leads. Over 150 suspects were formally questioned in the first few weeks alone. The department received thousands of letters and phone calls, some offering genuine tips, many offering wild fantasies. And then there were the confessions. Men, and even a few women, walked into police stations claiming responsibility. Some described the crime scene in detail, repeating facts they had read in newspapers. Others invented elaborate motives involving jealousy, revenge, or secret affairs. Psychiatrists were called to evaluate the confessors. Nearly all were ruled unreliable. Each false confession drained time and resources. Meanwhile, detectives attempted to reconstruct Elizabeth's final days. They retraced her steps to the Biltmore Hotel, interviewed staff members, and questioned anyone who might have seen her on January 9. Witnesses remembered fragments: a dark coat, a polite smile, a man waiting in the lobby. But no one could identify the man with certainty, and that uncertainty created space for endless suspicion. The medical theory. One detail continued to trouble investigators: the surgical precision of the bisection. The body had been cut cleanly at the lumbar spine, a difficult procedure without knowledge of anatomy. The separation was not jagged or random. It suggested skill, control, possibly training. Detectives quietly began examining individuals with medical backgrounds. Doctors were interviewed, medical students were scrutinized, even mortuary employees and butchers found themselves questioned. Among the names that would later draw attention was Dr. George Hodel, a wealthy, well-connected physician in Los Angeles. Though not publicly accused at the time, rumors about his behavior and private life would resurface decades later, casting long shadows over the case. But in 1947, suspicion alone was not evidence, and evidence was desperately thin. The missing crime scene. Perhaps the greatest obstacle in the investigation was the absence of a confirmed murder location. The vacant lot where Elizabeth's body was discovered showed no signs of struggle. There was almost no blood. The body had been carefully washed. This indicated she had been killed elsewhere, indoors most likely. But where? Detectives canvassed neighborhoods. They searched abandoned buildings. They followed tips about screams heard in the night. None led to a confirmed site. Without a primary crime scene, physical clues were nearly impossible to gather. Forensic science in the 1940s was limited. There was no DNA analysis, no sophisticated trace evidence testing. The killer had chosen his methods carefully, whether by intelligence or luck. The press and the public. As the weeks passed, the media frenzy intensified. Newspapers competed aggressively for exclusive details. Reporters sometimes published sensitive information before detectives could verify it. The nickname Black Dahlia became permanent, overshadowing Elizabeth's real identity. Some stories painted her as a dangerous seductress. Others implied secret relationships with powerful men. Many of these claims were exaggerated or entirely unsubstantiated, but they shaped public perception. The case was no longer just about justice. It had become entertainment. And that complicated everything. Investigators struggled to separate fact from rumor. Witnesses' memories became contaminated by headlines. People began inserting themselves into the narrative, claiming connections they never truly had. In many ways, the spectacle shielded the killer, because while the public chased scandal, the truth quietly slipped further away. The letters stopped. The mysterious communication signed Black Dahlia Avenger had initially electrified the case. The package containing Elizabeth's personal belongings proved that the sender had intimate access to her. Yet by late February, the letters stopped. No explanation, no farewell message, just silence. Detectives debated the reason. Some believed the killer feared capture. Others thought he had grown bored after achieving his desired notoriety. A few suggested something darker, that the murder had fulfilled a personal psychological need. If that were true, would he strike again? Police monitored similar crimes across California, but none matched the brutality and staging of Elizabeth Short's murder. It stood alone, unique, terrifying. Suspects rise and fall. Over the months, several briefly appeared promising: a man with a history of violence, a former boyfriend with inconsistent statements, a transient worker who vanished shortly after the murder. Each time, detectives followed the trail, checking alibis, cross-referencing timelines, searching residences, and each time the trail collapsed. Alibis held, witnesses recanted, evidence proved circumstantial at best. One suspect reportedly showed disturbing knowledge of surgical techniques. Another had been seen near the dump site days before the body was found. Yet none could be definitively tied to the crime. The case file grew thicker, but clarity remained elusive. A city moves on. By the end of 1947, Los Angeles had begun to shift its focus. Other crimes demanded attention. Other scandals filled headlines. The Black Dahlia story, once front-page news daily, gradually receded, but it never disappeared entirely. Detectives continued to revisit the file. Periodically, new tips would reignite hope. Years later, retired officers would confess that the case haunted them, not just because of its brutality, but because of its failure. The murderer had executed a crime so shocking that it ensured infamy, and yet he had left almost nothing behind. No fingerprints, no confirmed witnesses, no confession that could withstand scrutiny. Just a posed body in a vacant lot and a city forever changed. The lingering question. Perhaps the most unsettling thought was this: the killer may have walked freely among the citizens of Los Angeles for decades. He may have started a family, attended dinner parties, smiled at neighbors, all while carrying knowledge that no one else possessed. The murder of Elizabeth Short did not simply remain unsolved, it evolved into legend, a symbol of Hollywood's dark underbelly, a cautionary tale about ambition, vulnerability, and obsession. But legends can obscure truth. And as years passed, a new generation of investigators would begin asking a dangerous question. What if the answer had always been hidden in plain sight? As the years passed, the murder of Elizabeth Short stopped being just an open case. It became an American obsession. The original detectives aged, some retired, some died, but the file remained, thick with interviews, photographs, letters, and unanswered questions. In Los Angeles, the story lingered like a ghost woven into the city's identity. And with time, theories multiplied. The Doctor in the Shadows. One of the most talked about suspects to emerge decades later was Dr. George Hodel, a prominent Los Angeles physician in the 1940s. Charismatic, intelligent, and well-connected, Hodel lived a life that blended privilege with secrecy. In the early 2000s, former LAPD homicide detective Steve Hodel, George Hodel's own son, publicly accused his father of being the Black Dahlia killer. He pointed to old surveillance recordings from the 1950s in which George Hodel allegedly made cryptic statements. He cited photographs found among his father's belongings that resembled Elizabeth. But resemblance is not proof. No direct forensic evidence ever tied George Hodel to the murder. No charges were filed. Supporters of the theory argue that his medical training and rumored fascination with surrealism align disturbingly well with the crime's theatrical nature. Skeptics counter that the case against him is circumstantial, built on interpretation rather than solid fact. Still, his name refuses to fade. The serial killer theory. Another theory suggests that Elizabeth's murder was not an isolated act, but part of a larger pattern. Some researchers have speculated about links between the Black Dahlia case and other unsolved murders in California during the 1940s. A few crimes involved women whose bodies were found posed or mutilated. However, none matched the exact brutality or precision of Elizabeth's case. Was the killer experimenting? Was Elizabeth chosen at random? Or was she specifically targeted? If the murder was the work of a serial offender, why didn't similar crimes continue with the same signature? The lack of clear repetition makes the serial killer theory both plausible and frustratingly incomplete. A personal motive? Despite the sensationalism, some investigators believe the simplest explanation might be the correct one. Elizabeth knew her killer. Her final days were spent moving through social circles filled with acquaintances, men she had recently met, men she trusted enough to accept rides or temporary lodging from. What if the murder wasn't about fame or spectacle? What if it began as something smaller, an argument, a rejection, a sudden eruption of violence? The calculated mutilation complicates this theory. It suggests preparation and emotional detachment rather than spontaneous rage. Yet, human behavior is unpredictable. A crime can escalate quickly when fear of exposure sets in. If Elizabeth recognized her attacker, that would explain the absence of forced entry or struggle in a public place. But without a confirmed crime scene, the personal motive theory remains speculation. The media's shadow. Over time, the line between fact and myth blurred. Books were written, documentaries produced, fictional adaptations loosely inspired by the case reached wide audiences, including The Black Dahlia, directed by Brian De Palma. Each retelling added layers, some grounded in research, others in imagination. The danger of mythologizing the case is that it distances people from the real victim. Elizabeth Short was not a noir character. She was not a symbol. She was a young woman whose life ended violently. Yet the mystery made her larger than life. And perhaps that is exactly what the killer intended. Advances in forensics. As forensic science evolved in the late 1900s and early 21st centuries, renewed hope flickered. Cold cases were solved once considered impossible. Decades-old evidence yielded new answers in other investigations. High-profile cases across the country were reopened successfully. Many wondered, could the Black Dahlia case benefit from the same advances? The problem lies in preservation. Much of the physical evidence from 1947 has been lost, degraded, or contaminated. Handling standards at the time were not what they are today. Crime scene control was limited. Crowds and reporters had walked dangerously close to the body before full containment. Some items remain archived, but whether usable DNA could still be extracted is uncertain. And even if it could, comparison requires a suspect. Without one, even modern science struggles. The psychological puzzle. Perhaps the most enduring mystery is not just who committed the crime, but why. The staging of Elizabeth's body suggests more than concealment. It suggests communication. The killer posed her carefully, almost symmetrically. He washed her, he drained the blood, he sent personal belongings to the press, he signed letters with a theatrical alias. These are not the actions of someone desperate to hide. They are the actions of someone who wanted to control the narrative. Some criminal profilers argue that the crime reflects a need for dominance and recognition, a desire to shock the public and outsmart law enforcement. Others suggest deep-seated resentment towards women, possibly triggered by rejection or humiliation. But profiling is interpretation. Without a confirmed perpetrator, the psychological portrait remains incomplete. A case frozen in time. Nearly 80 decades later, the murder of Elizabeth Short remains officially unsolved. The case file still exists within the Los Angeles Police Department archives. Occasionally, new tips arrive, often inspired by books, documentaries, or family confessions made on deathbeds. Each lead is reviewed. None have closed the case. And that lingering uncertainty is what keeps the story alive. Because most crimes, even tragic ones, eventually find resolution, arrest, trial, conviction. This one did not. It hangs suspended in history, a reminder that even in a city built on illusion and storytelling, some stories refuse to reveal their ending. As the Part 3 draws to a close, one truth becomes unavoidable. The murder of Elizabeth Short is no longer just about identifying a killer. It is about confronting the possibility that some mysteries endure not because they are unsolvable, but because time, myth, and lost evidence have buried the truth too deeply to recover. And yet, hope flickers, because cold cases have been solved before. And somewhere, in an attic, in an archive, in a forgotten box of photographs, the missing piece may still exist. Time did what it always does. It moved forward. But the murder of Elizabeth Short never truly stayed behind. Decades passed in Los Angeles. The vacant lot on South Norton Avenue was eventually built over. New families moved in. Children played where flashbulbs once exploded, and detectives stood in stunned silence. Yet beneath the pavement and progress, the memory lingered, because some crimes refused to fade. The case that defined an era. The Black Dahlia murder became more than an unsolved homicide. It became a symbol of post-war Los Angeles, a city balancing glamour and darkness, studio spotlights and back-alley secrets. In 1947, America was adjusting to peace after World War II. Soldiers were returning home. Industries were booming. Optimism was supposed to define the era. But Elizabeth's murder shattered that illusion. It exposed vulnerability in a city that sold dreams. It showed that beneath Hollywood premieres and nightclub laughter, something far more sinister could exist. And perhaps that contrast is what cemented the case in public memory. It wasn't just brutality, it was the setting, the cultural obsession. Over the years, Elizabeth Short's story inspired books, investigations, and fictionalized retellings. Journalists revisited the case repeatedly. Amateur detectives formed theories. True crime writers built entire careers exploring its possibilities. In 2006, the case reached new audiences through The Black Dahlia, a stylized adaptation based loosely on the mystery. Though fictionalized, it reignited public fascination. Podcasts, documentaries, and online forums followed in later years. Digital communities dissected archived photographs and police files. Every generation seemed to rediscover the case and attempt to solve it anew. But fascination carries a risk. The more the story was retold, the more Elizabeth herself risked being overshadowed by the myth. She became the Black Dahlia, an icon of noir tragedy, rather than a young woman whose life ended violently. And that may be the cruelest twist of all. The human cost. Behind every theory lies a family. Elizabeth's mother endured the media storm in 1947, forced to identify her daughter while reporters circled relentlessly. For years, the family lived with unanswered questions. No arrest, no trial, no final explanation. Grief without resolution is a different kind of pain. It lingers longer. It reopens with every anniversary headline and every new documentary. The killer not only stole Elizabeth's life, he denied her loved ones closure. And that absence of justice is part of the case's enduring weight. Could it still be solved? Modern forensic science has cracked cases once considered impossible. Cold cases from the 1970s and earlier have been reopened with stunning success. The capture of the Joseph James DeAngelo, known as the Golden State Killer decades after his crimes, proved that time does not always guarantee escape. So could the Black Dahlia case still be solved? The possibility exists that it faces enormous challenges. Evidence from 1947 was not preserved with modern DNA standards. The crime scene was contaminated by crowds and reporters. Documentation methods were inconsistent. Some materials have been lost entirely. Even if viable forensic evidence remains, investigators would need a suspect to compare it against. And with nearly 80 years gone, many original suspects are deceased. Time protects as much as it reveals. The question that haunts. In the end, the murder of Elizabeth Short remains suspended between history and mystery. Was it the work of a calculating doctor, a jealous acquaintance, a transient killer passing through the city, or someone entirely overlooked? The truth may have lived quietly inside one person's memory for decades, perhaps confessed in a whisper no one believed, perhaps carried to the grave. There is something uniquely unsettling about that possibility, because justice unfinished feels incomplete. More than a mystery. Despite its darkness, the case has forced important conversations about media ethics, victim portrayal, and investigative limitations. In 1947, newspapers sensationalized Elizabeth's lifestyle, often implying scandal without evidence. Today, many journalists reflect on how differently the story might be covered. Modern true crime audiences increasingly seek empathy over exploitation, a reminder that behind every headline is a human being. Elizabeth Short was not a character in a noir film. She was a daughter, a sister, a young woman navigating a city built on illusion. The final reflection. Stand today on South Norton Avenue and nothing feels extraordinary. Traffic passes, homes stand quietly. There is no visible marker of what occurred there in January 1947. But history doesn't need monuments to survive. It survives in memory, in archives, in questions that refuse to disappear. The Black Dahlia case endures because it represents something unresolved, a reminder that even in an age of progress, certainty is not guaranteed. Some mysteries remain, and perhaps that is why the story continues to captivate, not because of gore, not because of spectacle, but because it challenges a fundamental belief that truth eventually always rises. In this case, it hasn't, at least not yet. And somewhere in the vast sprawl of Los Angeles history, the final answer waits, buried in silence, preserved in shadow, or perhaps lost forever.